body fat, a calorie deficit is typically necessary. It's not completely necessary, but it is typically necessary to be in a calorie deficit. To gain muscle optimally, you probably don't want to be in a calorie deficit. I mean, there are studies that look at body recomposition, and we see this even in really well-trained individuals. We do see body recomposition. The problem is it's a lot slower than what people hope, and it tends to only be very quick in 4 conditions: people that are brand new to training, newbie gains; people that are on steroids; people that are obese, because if you're obese, as you lose body fat, it's metabolically protective, and you can still gain a lot of muscle while you're losing significant amounts of body fat. And then people who have previously had significant amounts of muscle mass and are coming back from an injury. We see that they have more myonuclei, they regain the muscle a lot faster, they can body recomposition really well. So outside of those 4 categories, we don't see body recomposition happening extremely quickly. But in the research that we do see it happening, Barakat has done some good research on this. The guys at the ISSN have done some good research on this. When they have their protein levels higher, it tends to happen much more readily. They tend to gain more lean mass while losing body fat outside of a calorie deficit. So when people talk about what protein level should I set it at, there's a lot of what condition are you under? What are you a beginner? Where are your body fat levels now? Emotionally, mentally, what can you handle? Because I'll have a lot of clients come to me and they'll say, I want to gain muscle and I want to lose fat. Every person says that. Literally everybody that ever comes to any coach that has any kind of physique, type component to it, everybody says that. 99% of people want to do that. I say, yeah, I want to do that too. That is a really good plan for 2 people outside of those 4 conditions that I just mentioned. It's a really good plan for 2 people. It's a really good plan for people that are roughly where they want to be physique-wise anyways, and they just want to add a little bit of muscle, and they just want to lose a little bit of body fat, because people that are more advanced can be more comfortable with saying, I know these things work, I can take a little bit more time to be patient. People that have 20 pounds to lose or 30 pounds to lose and they got a beach vacation in 6 months, they don't feel that kind of patience. And so staging it might make more sense. Okay, well, let's cut body fat now. Maintaining muscle mass, unless you're a beginner, is probably what we'll put as our expectation. You'll go to your vacation, we'll come back, and then we'll talk about actually building the muscle that you need. The other person that recomposition works really well for are people that have an emotional concern with gaining body fat. And I'm not saying that that shouldn't be worked on, but I've worked with a lot of people that have, I've worked with many people where we've lost 60, 80, 100 pounds. And then I'm like, okay, cool. You're much healthier. We've gotten you down into a better body fat percentage. Let's now work on building up some lean muscle. It's going to be beneficial for all the things that lean muscle is beneficial for. And the entire idea of putting on even a couple pounds of body fat can really make them lock up. And I don't blame them for feeling that way. I mean, that's completely understandable, especially after maybe you had obesity in play and now you're getting into a part where like, I'm finally feeling good about myself and I am afraid that I'm going to get back into these positions. I see this a lot, not to be sex specific, but I see this a lot with women where I'll be working with a woman and she's only like 160 pounds and it's not significantly overweight by any means, right? Maybe a little skinny fat, a little bit doughy. And then the idea of, maybe, hey, look, you don't have a ton of body fat on, but you lack relatively, you could use more muscle than you could use losing body fat at this stage. You would benefit more from gaining muscle. So the 2 paths would be, we either gain muscle, which would probably be the fastest start to finish because we gain muscle outside of that calorie deficit. You might lose a little bit of body fat along the way. You don't promise that because you don't want to set the wrong expectations. Or we go into a body recomposition phase where we try to gain muscle and lose fat at the same time, put you in a very slight calorie deficit, not a full cut type calorie deficit. That might be better emotionally and mentally for that person. But that can be a good thing from a coaching perspective, because if you put somebody into that type of position, they can say, okay, I'm working with Allan or I'm working with Dave, and what they're doing is it's working. I'm seeing the body fat come off. Then maybe 3-6 months down the road, you have that conversation. Hey, you've lost some body fat. Why don't we now talk about putting on the lean muscle? They trust you a little bit more. They're a little bit more comfortable with the conversation and getting into that position. And then you go from there. You always have to meet the client, meet whoever you're working with where they are. Mm-hmm. And then make adjustments based on that. But the protein question was a wonderful question because it is one where people get very dogmatic about a lot of things in fitness and nutrition.
Well, with the protein, isn't it also going to be carb dependent? Because for instance, if your carbohydrates are more than adequate, then it's not going to go to the protein to be able to use as energy. If the carbohydrates are not adequate, and then the body is going to either have to go to protein or fats. Typically, I think it's going to go to protein first. I'm not 100% sure on this. And then the fats, right? So the excess protein, I guess what I'm saying, if it's excess protein, it's just expensive energy because it will kick the nitrogen off and it will just be converted into what the carbohydrate should be doing. But if the carbohydrates are really low, right, then the protein may have to go up.
If carbohydrate is really low, you're going to get an increase in amino acid oxidation, which means the protein is going to be used, just like you were saying, for energy sources. If you don't have energy, it's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And so it's going to start pulling it from...
Well, it's more expensive.
Yeah. It's a problem from a lot of areas. And actually that brings up another idea here. If you take carbohydrates too low, I mean, it can potentially blunt strength and hypertrophy progress as along this journey. And it does that because it starts to oxidize proteins more readily, which means there's going to be less available to build lean muscle, which means you probably have to take in more protein. And it's funny when we talk about diets like keto, because and this is one of those, the dogmatic stances that I see a lot of people take. They'll be like, well, do keto because in the short term, we don't see any real difference in muscle building. And yeah, in the short term, that's probably true. But the biggest problem with keto is, like you were saying, as carbs go down, and in ketogenic diets, you're at 50 grams of carbs or less per day. You would hope that to be able to make up for that, you could have a concurrent rise with protein. But if you take protein too high in a ketogenic diet, it takes you out of ketosis as well. And so you get a lot of these extra calories are coming in from fats. And so then you don't have the protective benefits that you're talking about by raising those proteins.
Well, where I wonder with a lot of people, not all of them, but a lot of people that will go on a diet like that is if you will look at the granular level, they're creating a calorie deficit.
100%. That's why it works.
That's why every
diet works. And I want to be very clear on this because there's a lot of people that get some of this confused. When you lose weight, it is because of energy balance. Your calorie intake is less than your energy output, right? People will always try to argue things like, oh, my hormones, or oh, this, or oh, that. And, the argument behind the ketogenic diet is this thing called the carbohydrate insulin hypothesis, which has been debunked for about 20 years because it just doesn't work. And if it did work, things like Wegovy and Ozempic wouldn't even work because they raise insulin levels. Energy balance predominates and takes over when fat loss or weight loss specifically is the topic. If you have an energy deficit, it doesn't matter what cortisol is doing. It doesn't matter what insulin is doing. Yes, those two things can be storage hormones in excess in the presence of a calorie surplus, but not in the presence of a calorie deficit. And so, that whole idea of calories in, calories out really holds true, particularly in weight loss contexts.
Well, I think that gets lost in a lot of the conversations because of marketing. You can take anything, right? It's where, I don't want to say I'm a proponent of intermittent fasting, but my first meal typically won't be until 1. It's just, I've just created a shorter window for me to put food in.
Yeah. And I
eat less.
Yeah. And I think that if people I use intermittent fasting with a lot of my clients. You'll also see on my, the content that I put out online, I do a lot of content where I debunk all of these benefits of fasting. And I'm not debunking the benefits of fasting because I don't think that intermittent fasting can work, because I think that intermittent fasting can work. But just like you said, it works because
Yes.
it creates a calorie deficit. And if you enjoy eating that way, absolutely eat that way. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Particularly if your goal is to lose body fat, there has been no suggestion that body composition is going to be any different, that that health outcomes are going to be any different. But my issue with things like long-term fasting and why there is a pushback against this is because fasting became a really big thing over the past, 2 to 5 years or so. And there were promises all over the place. It's going to increase your autophagy, which is going to improve your lifespan. It's going to regulate your blood pressure, your blood sugar, like anything that you can possibly think of, fasting will fix. And the more research that we started looking at, the more that we realized that it wasn't the fasting itself that did any of it. It was the energy deficit. It was the calorie deficit that it created. So when we look at the better research, and you take a study that looks at a continuous normal diet, and then you equate calorie levels over time with a fasting diet, you get similar or better outcomes with the continuous diet than you do with the fasting diet. Even in things like autophagy, which is the cellular repair of, removal of dead cells, replacement with better living cells, and all the benefits that suggests. Autophagy is mediated mainly by two things: a calorie deficit, an energy deficit in a cell, and exercise. So you don't have to do these really long-term fasts that, lower micronutrients, predispose you to potential muscle loss, lower proteins in your liver that are necessary to fight cancer. You don't have to go through IGF-1 drops. You don't have to go through all of these other problems that long-term fasting brings. You can get all of those benefits from autophagy just by losing excess body fat and exercising.
Yes.
Again, we go back. What are the four things? Fitness, nutrition, sleep, stress relief. So be exercising. Don't have extreme, amounts of excess body fat. Take care of yourself. And all of these things tend to work out on their own. You don't have to micromanage your hormones. You don't have to micromanage your autophagy. We need to get off this roller coaster of listening to every single person on social media that's got this special magical answer that all you have to do is, sign up for their newsletter and get that.
Well, it's interesting because with the way that I eat, it's evolved over a period of time, because in 2021, whatever it was, I want to lose 20 pounds a year until I get down to where I want to get down. Mm-hmm. And it's been working that way. But the way it's kind of worked is I just keep moving that first meal back. And I know all the things that you just said. And when I'll tell a lot of people about this, like, oh my God, you're going to lose muscle. I'm like, yeah, I know. That was part of the bargain I made, is I don't need 230 pounds of lean body mass. Mm-hmm. I get so I would never do this for performance, mm-hmm. So I guess that's what I would put out there. If anybody is listening, I'm like, no, the days I train in the morning, I'm eating before I train.
Yeah.
I'm eating the night before I train. All the other days I kick that way down the road, because I know that, and optimally I'll take branched chain amino acids or something when I get up, just to keep the amino acid pool. But I don't even know if that even fucking matters, right?
It doesn't.
It really doesn't even matter. And
if it makes you feel better, that's fine.
Sure.
The only thing that I usually, so the branched chain amino acid research is interesting too, because the more studies that we did about it, the more that we realized that if your protein's above like 1.1 to 1.3 grams per pound of body weight, the additional amino acids don't seem to do anything from a strength or anything like that perspective. The one thing that I would point out though, and I don't have problems with people doing, because there's not like a massive negative unless you're like majorly overdoing them, right? The one thing that I would point out for people though that are still doing that is they actually do contain calories. Legally, they're allowed to list them as 0, but they're amino acids. Amino acids have calories. That's why protein has calories.
Protein has calories.
That's why protein has calories. So just for your own knowledge, if you're taking an amino acid product, it's about 4.65 calories per gram of that product. So, people that are doing this was a bigger issue with bodybuilders than it was with powerlifters, where they did those ungodly amounts. They would put it in like the milk jug and they would drink it all day long. They were adding in like 400 or 500 extra calories per day. And then they were wondering why their cuts were so difficult, because they were drinking 400 calories of amino acids during that period. when they could have been just doing it from like a whey protein makes a lot more sense, because even if we look at an equated calorie and macronutrient profile, like if we equate the amino acid compositions between like a intact whole protein and a freeform amino acid product, the intact whole protein has more benefits anyways. It tends to work better. So if you've got a situation where you're like, hey, I would typically take my amino acid product here, well, maybe it might make sense to take a whey isolate instead. Clear wheys sit really easy in people's stomachs. Maybe that's the right choice there for you.
That just reminded me of something where, oh God, I'm going to date myself, probably a decade ago. Shelby Starnes was being asked what the best protein bar was. He cut a piece of steak that was the same size
That's a
protein bar.
I've seen people do that with a block of cheese. They're like, this.
Yeah. And that cracked me up. So with carbohydrates, then where do you suggest that should lay?
Okay, so this is another great. All these questions are really good because it'll give people some guidelines, and I really like them. Now, here's the one thing that I want to point out with protein. We had a better answer for protein from a research standpoint. There's a lot of research on protein. With carbs, when we're talking about strength and performance and hypertrophy, it's a little bit more hazy. There was a new study, a new systemic review that came out literally within the past month, and its conclusion was that carbs did not add to hypertrophy. I kind of had the same reaction to it. Now, here's the thing. The research that they use in that, they admit that it's low quality. I would not ascribe to the idea that you don't need carbs for hypertrophy or certainly not performance, but that's not.
How are they defining hypertrophy?
They did measurements. They pooled through the breadth of evidence and looked for things that did measurements either through bioelectrical impedance, MRI, or water displacement techniques.
I was going to say, because an inflated muscle is going to be bigger than one that's not.
Yeah, and one of the problems with bioelectrical impedance, these are the things like the in-bodies, the scales that you hold, you stand on, they're shit. Their accuracy is absolutely terrible. I mean, their error rates are anywhere from a plus or minus 8. So like if you're 20% body fat, it could say that you're 28 or it could say that you're 12. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily a standardized error. So, people will often say, okay, well, I'm going to use this because the next time, I don't care if it's wrong. If it says that I'm 20 and I'm 25, I don't care. I just want to see a drop on 1% on the scale the next time that I read it. It doesn't necessarily work like that. And you can even test this. If you've got like an in-body at like your gym or one of those things at your home, one of the smart scales, take a reading first thing in the morning, get up, take a reading, stand on it, and then immediately go chug a liter of water and then get on it. All of that's going to count as lean mass because it can't differentiate between muscle and water and organ and some of those other things. It's not a 4-compartment model thing, but that's just one of the issues that we run into with the systemic review that's looking at carbs. When we look at the best data that I think that we should use to be able to identify this is when we look at the people that are actually doing really well in physique sports and powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting. What are they doing? Because if we've got a lack of evidence from a distinct, hey, we studied this many carbs in this person for this long and that's how much muscle they grew, which we don't have yet. And that's one of the reasons that I said this is a little bit more hazy than protein recommendations. A general rule for people that's really good for strength and hypertrophy is 3 to 8 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight. Now, when people do that math, and every time I've brought this up, people do the math and they're like, well, I can't lose body fat eating that many carbs. I'll say, right. But you just asked what would optimize building muscle and strength and performance. We wouldn't think that would be in a calorie deficit, would we? I mean, it probably wouldn't be a significant calorie deficit because it's probably going to impact performance. Calorie deficits impact strength a lot less than they impact hypertrophy, but it still tends to impact it over time, particularly the leaner that you get and the more muscle that you have, the stronger that you are. I mean, elite powerlifters that cut carbs notice it.